Hello, Westminster. My name is Boyd Taylor, and I'm here today to talk about the fall edition of the Westminster Writers Journal and visit with one of our contributors. The Writers Journal is a platform for creative expression, poetry, nonfiction, memoirs, fiction, essays by Westminster residents. The spring edition was a was a big success, but we do happen to have some more copies left, and they're still available at the little store. If you didn't get one when it first came out, you might pick one up now. The fall edition has 45 resident contributors, so it'll be larger than the spring edition. And if Amazon does their part, the new journal should be here in mid-November. It's now in their hands. My guest today is one of those writers, Dr. 0McBride, who's Professor Emeritus in the Department of Geological Sciences at the University of Texas, with a distinguished academic career there. His article in the fall edition of the journal is entitled Encounters with West Texas Wildlife, which we will talk about in a little while. Good morning, Earl.
Good morning.
How are you getting along in these strange times?
I'm trying to stay sane like everyone else. Seems to get a little tougher each day, but well, I'm in the same boat everyone else and surviving.
So at least we've got an excuse if we go temporarily insane.
Yeah.
So I understand what you're saying, though. So how would a virtual classroom have appealed to you if you were still holding classes over at UT?
I would have retired.
You would have retired.
Well, I am retired. But
you are
if I had
retired.
not been retired, I would have handed in my resignation immediately. It's one of my colleagues did.
Yeah.
Because a lot of some of my classes involve the use of a microscope, and you can't teach microscopy on the internet.
I wonder how they're doing that.
Well, they haven't done it yet. It remains to be seen. Yes.
Yeah. I guess they could do social distancing and do a lot of cleansing or something, but I don't know. It sounds really hard. So you are retired. When did you move to Westminster?
I moved in here about February of last year.
February of 2020?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you haven't seen us in all our glory then. You've just seen us in lockdown, more or less, haven't you?
Yes.
Well, I think in our case, we've been here longer, but we feel very fortunate to be here and have a great staff looking after us, despite the restrictions that have been placed on us. So, what led you to come to Westminster?
Security. I've had about 3 strokes in my life. And the likelihood of having another is fairly high.
Yeah.
And my daughters and I agreed that I need to be someplace. I needed to be someplace if I had immediate health issues that I could get immediate help instead of calling just 911. And there's a friend of ours who she makes it a policy to check out retirement complexes in Travis County to provide counsel to someone like me. When I was realizing, well, need to get out of my house. I need to go someplace with a certain degree of security. And that's why I ended up here.
And well, that sounds like a very thoughtful and wise decision, well informed, and you were fortunate to have somebody at hand that could
yes,
advise you about that. Your daughters, you mentioned you have daughters. They live here?
2 daughters living in Travis County.
Mm-hmm. So have you gotten to see them at all in the last few months?
Yes. One daughter comes every 10 days. I have an automated pill dispenser.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you've ever seen one of these, but they're designed so that people like me, if I forget what meds I've taken, in the morning, I can't overdose by taking the same meds in the evening. Because
Yeah,
only
yeah.
dispense a certain number of pills each day on a certain schedule.
That's that's another thoughtful thing to have. Yeah, my wife has an automatic pill dispenser. It's me,
Oh, well,
but my I don't think hers works quite as well as yours does, because occasionally I'll find a pill lying around on the
oh, yes.
counter, and I'll think, now which day was that? So if I do, I just throw it away and we go right ahead. Um, So I read that you grew up in Illinois, in Moline. Is that right?
Uh, in that county area, yes.
In the county, yeah.
Rock Island,
Well, I think of Moline, I think of John Deere.
of course.
Yeah.
And during the summers when I was in college, in a small four-year college in the Rock Island, I worked for International Harvester, making tractors.
Oh, you did. Yeah.
And one summer I worked for the Rock Island Railroad.
What did you do for the railroad? Not laying track, I hope.
No. I was in the repair shop.
Uh-huh.
Basically, I spent most of my time trying to look busy.
With what?
I spent most of my time trying to look busy.
Oh, trying to look busy. Yeah, that was the
Not
days
enough
of.
work for me. So, and I found I was bugging the foreman every time he'd give me a little task. You know, I'd do it in 20 minutes, and he didn't want me to. He didn't want me to keep bugging him. And so I realized, okay, so I brought a couple of paperback books, and I'd found a very quiet place way out in the boonies of the complex, and I'd read paperbacks, and he was happy.
He was happy. You were happy.
Right.
Everybody was happy except for railroad shareholders. Railroads had a staffing problem,
Yeah.
I think, in those days, probably. So you went to high school in the Quad City area.
Yes.
When did you first set your sights on a career in geology?
When I was in high school, I knew I wanted to be a scientist. There was no career counseling in those days. I had no idea what kind of jobs are available for scientists. And
Excuse me, Earl, could I ask you just sit back just a little bit? I'm just getting the bottom of your face. There you go. Thank you. So there were no career counseling at that high school.
no, not for another decade.
Yeah.
So I was, what major should I take up in college? And I said, okay, I had some chemistry and some physics and astronomy in high school. So I said, okay, chemistry, that's a science. So I decided I would be a chemistry major as an undergraduate. And I realized, I could write the chemical reactions, not a problem, but I'm a very visual person, and I couldn't get my hands on the chemicals.
Yeah.
And I was a brown bagger, brought my lunch in every day. And one of my brown bag buddies was a geology major. And he says, hey, Earl, he said, come on with me this Saturday. He said, I'm going out to a limestone quarry and look for fossils. And I thought that's a pretty stupid thing to do, but I joined him. I went out to the quarry, and I could see limestones. I could see calcite crystals. I could see fossils. I said, dang, I can see these things. I can touch them.
Yeah.
I can pick up the calcite crystals. And I said, this is for me. And that day, I changed my major from chemistry to geology. I never looked back.
Never look back. Yeah.
Now,
that's a great story.
Having an interest in sedimentary rocks, I can't reconstruct those thoughts, but I did. Sedimentary rocks are the rocks where we get most of our oil and gas. The oil forms in the shales, the compacted muds, and the oil and gas migrates into shallower buried rocks in pores between mineral grains. So knowing something about being able to figure out something about the porosity history, the pore history in a rock, is critical to finding reserves of oil and gas in the subsurface. When people ask me, did I ever look for oil? I said, I found oil. I found oil in my driveway under my car. not the best place for it,
But
but
you pointed the way.
yes.
You pointed the way where the oil and gas companies might explore. So
Yes.
well, back on your education, I know you got your MA in at Missouri, and then you went to Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins, I gather, was specializes in training researchers and professors. Am I overstating that, or is that not their
Oh, that's not,
their expertise?
they are basically, they're a graduate institution. They don't encourage people to go there for master's degrees. They say, hey, we're a high root, high output educational institution.
Yeah,
Come here if you want a PhD.
yeah.
To work in industry, to be a teacher, whatever your purpose might be. And they had a very strong reputation in geology, a couple of good professors there. And that's what attracted me. Now I have to tell people that, yeah, I went to Johns Hopkins, but I went to the university, not the medical school.
Yeah, that's a normal mistake, I think.
Yeah.
The medical school has got such high visibility.
Yes.
And I so you got your PhD there. What brought you to Austin and to University of Texas?
Well, the chairman of the geology department at UT realized he needed an additional faculty member in sedimentary geology. And it was the impression in the US at that time that there were two main schools that specialized in sedimentary geology. One was Penn State and the other was Johns Hopkins. So he already had a Penn State graduate in the department. And he says, I need to get a graduate from Johns Hopkins. So he called my supervisor and he says, you have anybody looking for a job? And my supervisor said, yeah, I got this guy McBride. So I was basically hired over the telephone.
Had you been to Texas?
Pardon?
Had you ever been to Texas?
Yes, I worked for Shell Oil Company 2 summers, once in
Houston
and once in Corpus Christi.
Ah.
And when my wife and I showed up one early September, after I'd accepted the position here, we rented an apartment here in Austin. And one Saturday I said, well, let's go out and just sort of drive around the countryside and see what it's like. And of course, we ended up out on an Enchanted Rock. And driving out there on a weekend, in an August weekend, I thought to myself, I says, I wonder when they do field work out here. It is too hot. You can't spend time out in the field like this on good days like this. Well, little did I know.
You can.
You can. And I spent 5 or 6 summers studying rocks north of Big Bend, 40 miles north. So it was on private ranch land and not on state or national park property. And I'm sure that when I started my field work out there, I was a genius. But 5 or 6 summers of that West Texas heat altered my brain. And now I only have the talent and the educational skills of a politician. So big drop.
Your brain is fried.
Yeah. I'll say.
I'm sure not. I'm sure not.
Well, those West Texas in the summer, the dark colored rocks would get so hot in the daytime, you couldn't pick them up.
Oh my.
My colleagues wore gloves in the summer out there because the rocks get so hot. I mean, especially the dark ones.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so you led several field trips out in the marathon area during your career. Yeah. So would that be a group of graduate students or faculty members, or how are those organized?
Well, all undergraduate majors, geology majors, have to take about a 6-week-long summer field course. And we taught ours at UT many years at a ranch. We'd stay at a ranch south of the little village of Marathon, Texas. And every day we get up, and by 7:30 in the morning, we're out looking at rocks. And we're out looking at rocks for educational purposes all day, from 7:30 to about 4:30. And because there's some very nice, very excellent sedimentary rocks exposed in that area just south of the village of Marathon. Well, I got interested in some of the rocks that I'd seen as an instructor in the class, and I decided to do some research on those after the class was over. And so that became my field area for about a dozen years.
I see. Yeah.
And it's great geologically. You have to deal with the heat in the summer, and it's brutal. It's so hot that the rattlesnakes don't go out in the daytime in the summer. The ground is too hot for their tummies. So
Only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. So the rattlesnakes have enough sense to stay in, but
geologists don't.
you all were out though early in the morning or after dark, at dusk, I suspect also. So you deal with a rattlesnake story in your piece for the journal. I'll talk about in a minute. But so that's Marathon is in Brewster County, I think.
Yes.
Is there there's oil and gas production in Brewster County?
No.
No,
They've looked.
they've looked.
Yeah, they've never found any.
No tight sands there, no shale. Yeah.
No, they did find a little natural gas,
Uh-huh.
but it played out in about 6 months.
Well, there's nothing worse to find than a little bit of natural gas.
Yeah.
Because you can't market it. You can just sit there.
Yeah.
And you can't really write it off either until you're finished. But at any rate, that I'm sure those were interesting times for you. But you spent time in a lot of other parts of the world. I know you were in. You consulted some for the Mexican National Oil Company, and you worked in northern Mexico. Is that the same general area as the area in Brewster County or around Marathon? You were in northern Mexico.
In northern Mexico, but no, they completely different topography, different kinds of sedimentary rocks, all with their own special kinds of problems.
I see.
And the goal of any geologist, one of the goals is to look at the rock and figure out how it formed. Give a report, how did this rock form? If it's a granite, great. If it's a marble, okay, same kind of questions arise. And I've always focused all my efforts on sedimentary rocks. They always intrigue me more than igneous rocks or metamorphic rocks.
So how are sedimentary rocks formed?
The majority are consolidated sediment. So rivers have transported pebbles and sand and silt down to the shoreline at the nearest ocean and deposit them there. And as sedimentary rocks get buried eventually over time to a half a mile thickness, the weight of those rocks compacts the grains into closer packing and tends to obliterate the pores, there is no pores between the grains.
See.
At that time, then groundwater can percolate through the pores and start precipitating some other mineral like calcite. And the result is the process converts sediment into rock, sedimentary rock. Sand becomes sandstone, gravel becomes conglomerate, compacted muds become shales. And they all have a great complexity. And the more rocks you see, the better your expertise is interpreting their origin.
Yeah, yeah. So has the increased the technological changes, how has that affected the geologist's work in with sedimentary rocks? I mean, satellites and computing power. Has that all affected the ability of the scientist to make his?
The biggest change that technology has brought is additional ways of looking at the mineral grains.
Mm-hmm.
For example, shales are merely compacted muds. And for decades, there was no good way to study shales because they were too fine grained.
Yeah.
There's a limit to magnification you can get with ordinary light. So they said, well, let's use the electron microscope that has greater magnifying powers. And even that has limitations of what you can see, what you can determine with that instrument. So they kept adding new things to it. Okay, an electron microscope with the capabilities of X-ray diffraction. With X-ray diffraction, you have another tool to help identify minerals.
Yeah.
And so now the soft rock geologist, sedimentary geologist, working in the lab, has access to all kinds of instruments and tools that I never had. And you need expertise outside my level of expertise. I'm still using techniques that were initiated 60 years ago, but they are still very powerful.
Yes.
Now, the kind of research that I've done or had interest in is understanding the origin of that piece of flint, of that piece of limestone, of that piece of sandstone. Now, that's an academic question, but there's spin-off and trying to figure out the origin of sandstones. I always run into the issue, what's been the history of the pores that originally existed between those sand grains? I look at the rock now and I see under the microscope, or I see with my naked eyes, I see there are no pores left in that sandstone. Why? What happened? And of course, the oil companies would like me to be predictive. Before you spend $3 million drilling a hole, looking for oil, if I can tell you before you start drilling, hey, don't drill here. There's no porosity left in those sandstones.
There's no porosity, there's not going to be any oil, is there?
That's right. Well, I would be rich and famous if I could do that. And all oil companies have their own staff working on that same question.
So Shell, you said you worked for Shell. Shell always had a reputation as being a premier research oil company. I thought, is that true?
Yes, their research group facility was in Houston.
Yeah,
and I know some of the guys that work for Shell, and some of our graduates ended up with Shell.
Yeah,
and I had the opportunity. Those 2 summers I worked for Shell, I worked in their exploration offices, and I was able to see how oil exploration was done back in the 1960s. And I said, I do not want to do this. I do not want to do this for a career.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I'm not going to join an oil company.
Yeah.
Got to go in academia.
Well, it gave you a lot broader look and a greater opportunity to make a contribution to the science rather than just being involved in its application. I'm sure. So we're running a little short of time. Before we do, I wanted to ask you about an article I saw that you wrote about shrapnel in the Omaha Beach sands in Normandy. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, my chief interest in sedimentary rocks is in sandstones. So wherever I travel, I collect a local sample of the nearby sand, whether it's a river, whether it's a dune, whether it's a beach. So I always pick up a little sample of sand. And I was working on a study on river sands in France with a friend from the University of Utah. And my wife was with me that summer. So the 3 of us went to Omaha Beach as tourists. And since it's sand, I collected a small sample of sand and brought it back to Austin. And I didn't look at it for about five years because I was still heavily involved in teaching and labs, classes, and so forth. So after a while, I said, okay, it's time to look at that Omaha Beach sand. And what I found was that about 15% of my sample was shrapnel fragments left
15%.
over. 15%.
Goodness.
Now, most of the grains are quartz and feldspars and micas and normal sand grains. But these are iron and steel pieces of metal. And they are rusting. Metal, iron doesn't do very well in salt water. Of course, they've been sitting in salt water since the
44.
invaded.
Yeah.
And I was astonished. Now, if when I collected my sample, if someone had said, "Hey, do you expect to find any relics of the battle in those?" I would have thought, "I'll bet there are some."
Hmm.
And but when I did find them, I was astonished. I was surprised.
That's
And yeah, it's
amazing,
those grains,
amazing amount of firepower. Yeah.
those grains are they're oxidizing, they are weathering. They form a little coating of iron oxide on each of those shrapnel grains, and over time, those grains bump into their neighbors, and it abrades off that iron oxide coating, so additional weathering can take place, additional oxidation.
Yeah.
Those grains, I think, will be gone in another 15 or 20 years. We looked at samples from Utah Beach, not a single grain of shrapnel.
Similar amount at Utah?
Well, Utah is the only beach where we found the shrapnel.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking it was Omaha Beach. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a very interesting point. It's amazing to me. So before we leave, I want to tell you I enjoyed your article. It discussed your confrontation with various forms of wildlife on these field trips we were talking about. Several of which involved you standing still or running for cover, right? So,
yes. Well, I grew up in Illinois, and the wildlife, there are squirrels and rabbits, and there's a few groundhogs here and there, and way out in the farms, you can find a deer now and then, and there are a few people who still do some deer hunting. So when I went out and spent some time in West Texas, this is terra incognita. I didn't recognize the plants, the birds, or the animals. We don't have javelinas in Illinois. We don't have large quantities of rattlesnakes in Illinois. So everything I saw out there was new to me, including the things that came out of the ground, the tarantula and the vinegaroon, which is also what is it called? It's called a whip scorpion.
I had never heard of that. How do you pronounce it? Neighborhood?
Vinegaroon.
Neighborhood.
Vinegaroon.
I had never heard of it, and it's a fascinating tale of a fight between a tarantula and a vinegaroon, and it ends in a way that I think is pretty surprising. So I know that our resident friends will be interested in reading about your encounters with the pig and the antelope and the rattlesnakes, and so makes very interesting articles, and makes me want to stay home. So anyway, thank you for sharing those stories with us, and thank you for being with me here today.
My pleasure.
So to all of you watching out there, the Writer's Journal Fall Edition will be out here in a matter of weeks. We'll keep you posted. And this is Boyd Taylor saying thanks again to Dr. 0McBride, and thanks to all of you Westminster residents for tuning in.